Inside a spacecraft falling back toward Earth, the air was hissing out into the vacuum, and the three men strapped to their seats were dying with almost no time to act. It did not happen at launch, and not on the long fall down through the atmosphere. It happened in space, above the line where space itself begins. These three are still the only human beings who have ever died up there, and they were supposed to come home as heroes. They had just spent 3 weeks aboard the world's first space station, longer than anyone alive. When the recovery team pried open the hatch, all three were gone, still strapped into their seats. They were killed by a valve the size of a fist, and by one decision made long before launch, to fly with no pressure suits. To understand how, you have to go back 3 weeks and meet 3 men the country did not yet know by name. The commander was Georgy Dobrovolsky, and this was his first flight. The flight engineer, Vladislav Volkov, was the only one who had flown before, and the test engineer, Viktor Patsayev, was a rookie too. They had been thrown together only days before launch, after the prime crew was pulled. A shadow on one man's lung X-ray had raised a suspicion of tuberculosis. The commander of that grounded crew was Alexei Leonov, the first human ever to walk in open space. Within days, his seat went to Dobrovolsky. That last-minute swap will come back to our story. What they were flying to was Salyut 1, the first space station ever built, which the Soviet Union had lifted into orbit that spring of 1971. While the United States raced to the moon, the Soviet Union had placed a different bet. A long-term home in orbit where people could live and work for months. But the station had hung empty over the planet for a month and a half already. The first crew, aboard Soyuz 10, had reached it, then failed to get inside and came home with nothing. Soyuz 11 was the second attempt, and the whole promise of the station rode on it. This time, everything worked. On the 7th of June, the new crew did what the last one could not. Dobrovolsky, on his very first flight, flew the craft in by hand and docked. The docking alone took more than 3 hours. Then, for the first time in history, 3 people opened a station's hatch, floated inside, and became its first crew. What followed were 22 days unlike anything lived before. They broke the world record for time in space. Patsayev became the first human to aim a telescope from orbit, and up there, he marked his own birthday, another first. They grew plants, ran dozens of experiments, and were the first people ever to vote from space. Every evening they went out live on television, and an entire country grew used to their faces. It was a pure triumph, and it was broadcast as one. But by the end of the 3rd week, the crew had built up an exhaustion no one had endured for so long. Doctors on the ground watched with unease as weeks of weightlessness reshaped the body, muscles weakening, the heart adapting. Ahead of them lay the part that, on paper, was the most routine of the whole mission. The trip home. No one imagined it was the coming home that would kill them. To understand why, stop looking at the station and look at the ship itself, and at one decision made on a drawing board. Soyuz had been designed as a craft for 2, but what mattered above all was showing something new, and the new thing was a crew of 3 at once. To fit a 3rd person into the same cabin, the engineers had to give something up. They gave up the suits. There was no room for 3 of them in pressure suits, so the suits were simply taken out. The cosmonauts flew in light training overalls, in ordinary clothes essentially. The whole design rested on one assumption, that there is always air inside the cabin, and as long as there is, no suit is needed. The safety of 3 men hung on a single condition, that the cabin stayed sealed. And this was not the first time.
7 years earlier, in 1964, the Soviet Union had sent 3 men into space at once for the first time aboard Volkov, a capsule hastily rebuilt from a one-seater. To cram 3 in, that craft had its ejection seats and its suits stripped out too. That time, it worked. And the gamble was remembered as a winning one. To show more than your rival could, you could risk a little safety. On Soyuz 11, the same bet was placed again.
There was one man who never trusted that bet. Alexei Leonov, the commander bumped from the flight, did not trust the craft's automatic systems. Between the crew cabin and the orbital module sat a valve meant to open on its own, low over the ground, to equalize the cabin pressure with the outside air. Leonov believed it could not be relied on and advised closing it by hand ahead of time. The crew of Soyuz 11 did not. And when Leonov himself timed the manual closing, it took close to a minute. In a real emergency, they would not have that minute. On the 29th of June, the crew said goodbye to the station, sealed the hatches, and undocked. From there, everything went perfectly. The craft turned itself around, fired its braking engine, and dropped toward re-entry. A few minutes later came the separation. 2 of the ship's modules were to be cast off from the descent capsule, kicked away by small pyrotechnic charges that fire one after another in sequence. But this time the charges did not fire in sequence. They all fired at once. The shock was harder than anyone had planned for, and it broke the seal on that very valve Leonov had warned about. The valve opened, not low over the ground the way it should have, but at an altitude of 168 kilometers, in vacuum. And through it, the air began pouring out of the cabin. The cosmonauts understood what was happening. One of them, judging by where his body was found, it was Patsayev, unstrapped and reached for the valve to close it by hand. He did not have the minute Leonov had spoken of. In a decompression like that, a person stays conscious for around 40 seconds. For any deliberate, meaningful action, the window is under 20. The valve was awkwardly placed. He still had to reach it. The air was gone in under a minute. From the flight recorder, those seconds were reconstructed down to fractions. The pressure collapsed, and almost at once, the hearts stopped. By the time the pressure reached 0, there was no one left to save. And from the outside, it all looked flawless. The capsule flew itself through the atmosphere, released its own parachute, and touched down softly on the Kazakh steppe, exactly on schedule. From the ground, it was a perfect landing. The recovery party drove out to greet 3 tired but living heroes. They opened the hatch. All 3 were in their places, strapped in, motionless. By the account of Karim Karimov, the chairman of the State Commission, there were dark blue blotches on their faces and blood from their noses and ears. Doctors tried to bring the crew back right there on the steppe. It was useless. The men had been dead for more than half an hour. The autopsy showed what the vacuum does to a body. When the pressure dropped to almost nothing, the gases dissolved in their blood, oxygen and nitrogen, began to boil inside the vessels. Vessels in the brain ruptured. There were small hemorrhages under the skin, in the nose, in the inner ear. That was the cause of death. Not suffocation in the ordinary sense, but a sudden decompression the body is simply not built to survive. It is exactly what a pressure suit protects you from. The one that was not on board. And that is the whole arithmetic of this disaster. An immensely complex spacecraft did almost everything flawlessly. The docking, 3 weeks on the station, the descent, the parachute, the landing. It was undone by one part the size of a fist, opening far earlier than it should have. And that part was lethal only because, at the design stage, someone had decided that to show off a craft for 3, the suits could be sacrificed. In their suits, the failed valve would have been a problem, not a death sentence. After this, crewed flights in the Soviet Union were halted for more than 2 years. Soyuz was redesigned, honestly this time. The third seat was taken out, the crew was cut back to 2, and the freed space was given over to light Sokol suits, which cosmonauts were now required to wear at launch, at docking, and on descent. Their direct descendants are still worn by crews flying today, half a century later. Since then, no crew comes back from orbit in shirt sleeves, and a decompression on the way down has never killed anyone again. The suits came back on board only after there was no one left to save.
The State Commission took the ship apart almost screw by screw before it found the guilty valve, and understood that the separation charges had fired all together instead of one by one. The cause of death itself was kept secret in the Soviet Union for nearly 2 years. In the West, engineers preparing their own station did not know what to fear. 3 men had come back dead from a descent that looked perfect, and what had killed them was unknown. Salyut 1 was soon brought down out of orbit and burned up in the atmosphere, having never taken on a second crew. The 3 were buried with full honors, their ashes sealed into the Kremlin wall beside Gagarin's. The American astronaut Thomas Stafford flew to Moscow for the funeral. At the height of the space race, the rivals sent one of their own, and he helped carry the coffin. That same year, the crew of Apollo 15 left a small plaque on the moon with the names of the astronauts and cosmonauts who had died, and the 3 names from Soyuz 11 are on it. Behind the scale and the records, it is easy to lose what this really was. 3 living people who for 3 weeks did what no one had ever done and came on the air every single evening. One of them marked his birthday in space, the first human ever to do so. They were waited for at home, by wives, by children, by a whole country. They were coming back as winners, with less than an hour to go before the ground. They were not killed by the failure itself. Machines break everywhere. They were killed because between the failure and their lives, nothing had been left. No suit, and no spare for the minute it takes to reach a valve. The suits returned to the ship on the very next flight. For the 3 of them, that came one flight too late.